Thank you so much for joining us today on our Levy interview series. I'm here to introduce Ben Metcalfe, who I'm lucky enough to call a friend, someone I've seen grow, build, just do amazing, wonderful things, and always, frankly, inspires me to want to push myself and do cool new things, and frankly, think differently in so many different ways. And so today we're going to talk about a bunch of different pieces because Ben's had one of these amazing careers where he's gone from working at sort of really cool early big name tech companies, then going to start his own really successful tech company, then going to a big other really famous tech company in a really cool senior position, and then going to be a VC. And so all these different paths in life, which in many ways are, I joke a little bit, but are in some ways a sort of quasi-traditional path that frankly a lot of people would love to emulate, but also for someone who I think is sort of this anti-normal path sort of person. So I would love to hear about all those things. And maybe just we'll kick that off a little bit, Ben. Like tell me more about, you started your career, you were at like the BBC and then MySpace, which plenty of people don't even maybe remember, but like could have been Facebook had they not messed things up. Like how did that even occur? Why did you even get into any of that stuff?
Yeah, thank you. And by the way, that's a very kind introduction. I had a nice smile on my face. It's always difficult to hear people say nice words about you, but thank you. And you're a great friend as well. So really, thank you for having me. I started my career at the BBC at the age of 18. I was one of these obnoxious kids that learned programming when they were 12. Had a startup, which wasn't really a real startup. It was a free email service when I was a teenager. Kind of messed up my grades at school because I was running that when I was 17, 18. And couldn't really get into a decent university, kind of couldn't really afford it, and got a graduate level job at the age of 18 at the BBC, which in London, where I grew up, was a reasonably prestigious environment for internet and tech, and that was in the year 2000. So I was given the job and along with a bunch of other real graduates, and my career kind of went from there, which was amazing.
Does that part of your life sort of, would you tell your wonderful child that maybe university doesn't matter because you can, if you have something that you're in love with and you want to do, people will hire you, even in sort of the old world of the BBC, which I'd imagine would not hire people without a university degree, but obviously they did.
It's a real tough one because in the year so I started building websites in 94 and launched a startup in 97 and joined in the year 2000. And even then, computer science degrees at university were not really teaching a lot of internet stuff. So I arguably wouldn't have learned a whole lot, which was partly why I was able to go and do it. I think now you wouldn't be able to pull it off. I also would say, I could answer for half an hour that question, but I won't. But I think the other thing I would say is there's a rite of passage and there's an alumni network that you get from going to university that I didn't have and I don't have today. And so I probably wouldn't feel comfortable with my son Onyx not going to university, unless of course he wants to do something else in his life. It's ultimately his decision. I think there are a lot of values. I think whether or not education the education industry, particularly in this country in America, is any good, and the issues with it for another time. But generally speaking, I think it was a do as I say and not as I do type thing for when my son grows up.
Fair enough. Although once again, you have this career that I think a lot of people who are wanting to get into the tech space, or even founders, and a lot of people that we talk to on a regular basis would love to emulate. I mean, it's been such a successful career, and hopefully you feel that way. I know you feel like you have a lot further to go and lots more to still do, but in many cases, a pretty exciting one. And so then, okay, so you're at BBC.
Yep.
And then you get a job at MySpace, which I don't know when you were there exactly, but probably was a really hot, sexy job to have.
It was interesting for sure. So my background is building content management systems at the BBC. I helped launch some of the versions of the BBC News website. I then went on to design, launch, build, run the BBC's developer platform and API. And I was like 22, I think, when I was doing that.
And that pissed everyone off because you were probably a lot of like senior people reporting to you at that point. I had obnoxious kid.
I had like a BBC News. I had a guy on my team, and I was running this team. I was 19 and he was 43, I think. And I would go home and my mum would wash my clothes for me and I'd go and do what 19-year-olds do. I was obnoxious and I talked to them. I'm still in good, I'm not in contact with that particular individual, but a lot of people I work with, and they're like, you're a good guy, smart, whatever, but you were obnoxious because you were 19 and everyone had gone to university and got their rites of passage and everything else out of them. So I look back on it with some wry smile. But anyway, I launched the BBC's developer platform with some folks and ended up coming out to America a lot, out to San Francisco to promote it and get established with the open source communities and open data communities and stuff. And this was 2004, 2005, and then it became obvious I should move out here because my career was kind of stuck at the BBC. At 24, I wasn't really going to be given anything more senior as a role. And there was not really a lot else going on in the UK at that time, unless you want to join a digital agency, which I didn't. And so I made the decision to move out here, and I moved out here and I did a few other things and tried to get some things off the ground. But I think within about 6 months, I was actually verbally offered a job to help run Google's developer platform, but they then discovered I didn't have a college degree, and that was a problem because they had that whole great GPA thing they were doing. And
which is crazy because you'd think Google is someone who would say, and I thought they used to say, we just want to hire really smart people who do great stuff and not care.
No, back in the day, it was all about you had to have a high GPA, which I don't have because I didn't go to university. So I then ended up at MySpace, and they knew me through Adam Bain, actually, who, did you used to work with Adam?
I did not, but I know of Adam, of course.
Adam was wanting me to go and work for Fox Interactive Media for some time, and then when they acquired MySpace, he was like, why don't you come and do this? We need to do a developer platform. And I don't mind admitting this now, I had no money. I was broke. I had no money and was short to not working out where my next rent payments were going to come. And so they offered me this great job. It was down in Beverly Hills, which is an interesting place to go and build a development team, a software team. And I would commute back and down up between San Francisco and Beverly Hills for a year to help set that up.
Why didn't you just move to Beverly Hills? I mean, I feel like you're being like 24, 25 and you get to live in Beverly Hills at a cool, really hot company.
Yeah, well, looking back on it, maybe I should, but I had developed this network up here, which I still think is valuable today of open source startups, whatever. And I didn't like the Beverly Hills, kind of like showbiz. It was interesting to be around a lot of that. I'd never really, I guess I worked at the BBC, which was a television studio itself. So I did work in the media there, but it was interesting, but I just didn't really. And I also don't think I also could see the writing on the wall. I think for them it was about maintaining a Google deal. They had $1 billion Google advertising deal that they needed to. It was never. Facebook was on the rise, and I think everyone could see that MySpace was going to flatline and decline, which of course it did. So I knew that I'd moved out here to America to do startups. So this was like a blip or a short-term thing. This was never a long-term project.
So you're doing the MySpace stuff. You're thinking, okay, this is a short-term thing. And then is that when you started WP Engine? Like, how did you get the idea for that and decide to start?
Yeah, there was a little bit of time since then. I did some work for a couple of other companies, helping them with developer platform and API type stuff, etc. And I was living with my then partner, who's not my partner anymore, but at the time was my girlfriend. And she had a very successful blog that she was making like 6 figures, like a low 6-figure, but 6 figures a year. And not necessarily working full-time. And it kind of opened my eyes about money that people were making blogging. And she was running WordPress. She didn't know how to properly run it, how to properly scale it for the traffic. It was getting hacked because at the time there were a lot of issues with WordPress if you didn't set it up and keep it up to date. There were just all these issues which anybody running WordPress today, hopefully at a company like WP Engine or one of the competitors, where they take care of all of this. But at the time you were on your own. And I looked at this and thought to myself, there is a market here to roll this out as a service so that you just kind of like sign up with a credit card and get a website, a WordPress website that's maintained up to date, properly provisioned. You don't have to install why should anybody install MySQL? I mean, what's that about? I mean, why should anyone have to do that? So I was thinking about it, started noodling on something, and then some people said to me, have you spoken to Jason Cohen, who's working on something very similar? I don't know if you know him, but you should chat with him. And I hadn't, and we got connected, and he, it made sense to kind of collaborate, and we started working together on what would become WP Engine. And
so then you guys, so you start collaborating in this, you start building it out, and it grows, I mean, like pretty fast. I don't know a lot of the history of it. I just know, and it's one of these companies I think that is not well known, at least in my mind, as like a massive Silicon Valley success story. But it kind of, I mean, it is, right? You guys have raised like 250 million plus in funding. I don't even have any idea what the valuation is. I don't think it's gone public
at this point.
Is what?
Yeah. It's a unicorn. Yeah.
Yeah, which is amazing. And
it's also not a Silicon Valley company. I've lived here in San Francisco for 18 years. I'm very proud of the fact that it's in Austin, Texas. It's an Austin, Texas-based company. WordPress is, not particularly geo-specific because it's a distributed company, but it is Automatic, the company behind it. But it's, Matt Mullenweg is from Texas. There's a lot of Texas roots with WordPress. And I think that at one point, WP Engine had raised the highest amount of venture capital of any Texas-based software company.
And so big success, growing, doing all those things, and yet you decided to leave to go to what at the time was a little bit of the, go to Uber and a little bit of the evil Borg at the time of the ride hailing space, and plus just ignoring every regulation in every city and country in the world just to get your product out the door. Yep. Why make that?
It's a good question. And I'm happy to be quite straightforward about it. I think I did 4 years at WP Engine, and I really enjoyed the art of the start, the 0 to 1. And we did do $1 million in revenue in the first year. The company did fantastic, and it was such a ride. We had this great thing where we hired Heather, who was the CEO, and she still is the CEO today. She'd taken a company called Bizarre Voice public as COO. We hired some amazing executives, very, very, very successful executives and other people throughout the organization. After 4 years, there came a point where it wasn't very clear where my talents and my abilities would really be the best place. We have all these great people like who've done marketing for 20 years or done sales for 20 years or been a CFO for 20 years. And it just came a point where I would much rather work on something new than continue to try and work in this big corporate environment, which was ironic because I went to then work in a big corporate environment, but I'll explain that in a second. But it just wasn't the right place for me to be after 4 years. I got 4 years and I was like, I'm good. So I was happy to move on and decided I would go and do something else. And
before we get to that other thing, actually, this brought up two really interesting questions that I think people would love to hear about. One, how did you go about, as a first-time founder, a company that's seeing explosive growth? How did you go about even just hiring these great people? Because one of the key things, as you know well, in startups, you can have the smartest founders in the world, but if they are bad recruiters or bad managers and can't build a team, that company will still fail. So how were you able, or what sort of secrets to success did you learn to hire the right people to give you an opportunity to walk away? And then I want to ask about that part too.
I mean, at the end of the day, being a founder, and certainly a CEO, and I wasn't the CEO, but as a founder, your primary roles are to set a vision, hire, fire, and raise money, right? And everything else is a bonus. And I think being in Austin, and I'm still a huge fan of Austin. Austin at the time in 2010, I think was an underappreciated market in terms of all this B2B talent. A lot of consumer stuff, the rise of Facebook and everything else was a lot of, but actually for B2B, Austin was and still is a fantastic place. We were able, and people are looking for options, right? If you live there, you've got your family there, you're not looking to come to the Bay Area, you're looking to stay in Austin. I think what was really great was networking, meeting the right people. At the end of the day, WP Engine at the very beginning was a mix of Rackspace and Bizarre Voice, which were the two huge similar companies that had risen up and people that had grown their skills and careers there, and then were looking for the next opportunity. And so many people looking at this probably don't even remember Rackspace, but Rackspace, I mean, Google Cloud and AWS, Rackspace at the time was the place where you hosted stuff and had great support. They were a great business. Unfortunately, it isn't anymore. We pulled a head of sales very early out of Rackspace, who was like one of the original salespeople at Rackspace, which was very similar to the type of thing we were selling. We pulled people out of Bizarre Voice. We pulled people out of Dell. There were a bunch of people there was just this latent talent, and I think by being able to have a good narrative around what you were building, good investors who were able to help us connect with people and just show that there was a real spark and an energy, people wanted to switch. They were happy to take a huge salary reduction. They were happy to take some people were anyway, were happy to take a risk, and we hired some great people. And not just the executives, I want to be clear, all the way through the organization. We hired veterans who had who had come back from a tour in Afghanistan or Iraq, and they were like 22, 23, and they were out of the military, and they were either going to flip burgers or they were going to come and be technical support people, and we trained them up, and they were amazing. And so you just have from top to bottom this amazing team of people who came together, who was so mission driven around what we were doing. And I think that's the secret. It's everybody. I know that's cheesy, but it comes down to who you hire, the team you have, the team that's then attracted from them, and what you can do together.
But it really starts in your mind with hiring. Is it hiring those like senior people that other people can get behind, or and then partially being a charismatic enough founder that someone's like, I can go trust this Ben guy who's young, but I can trust him enough that this is something that's taking off, it's going well, and I want to hitch a ride on this hopeful rocket ship.
Well, also, and Jason had already sold a business once before and was well known in Austin, and I think that between the two of us, I think it looked like a up and coming, company that had good velocity. I think the thing to keep in mind is it's all about networks. I mean, that's why I live in the Bay Area, is because of networks. And I was also able to bring some networks from here into WP Engine, but you hire smart executives, heads of departments, senior people, experienced, even if not senior, just experienced people. You hire a great salesperson, and then you say, great, now we need a sales team. And they're like, great, I've worked with loads of people, I can start bringing my network together. Whereas I don't know salespeople, it's not my background, and wasn't particularly Jason's either. And so suddenly you've got a great sales team coming together. So I think it's about the experience that people have and the networks that they bring as well. And again, that's like investing as well as hiring.
Yeah, no, it's sort of a rule, I think, for so many things. And it's actually part of why I give a lot of founders advice that if they're in different places, other parts of the country, and they're starting a company, they might want to move to San Francisco for a while, because you can build that network, that the density. I mean, people make fun of it because it can be annoying sometimes, where every coffee shop you go to, it's just all tech people. Mm-hmm. But the density is so great that you can build that network. There's an event every single night in San Francisco. If you want to go and meet people and build that network, you can do it here, whereas it just doesn't exist in other cities to the same degree. And those things last a lifetime, right? We met because just friend stuff, right? We met through friends, tech friends, and we were all having fun together when we were younger. And we've stayed friends and become closer friends throughout that period. And that wouldn't have happened had it not been for the density of people saying, you and me both, I want to be in the Bay Area around other tech founders building cool things and trying to change the world.
That's exactly right. And Austin has that network, New York has a little bit of that, London has a little bit of that, but I still think, we've stayed here all through the pandemic. We've been here 18 years, my wife and I. Well, we haven't known each other 18 years, but we've been here independently there, and we love it here. And San Francisco has its downsides and its ups and downs. But you only have to look at the AI revolution. There really is something going on with AI. And there really is 30 events a week at the moment in San Francisco. And even if half of them are crap, the other half are actually quite useful and interesting. And so and this is a really talent-driven industry. You need to really know what you're doing to properly build AI software. And that talent is coming in. It's moving here. And so it's all about networks and proximities. I think of everything as graphs, and the proximities of people and nodes, and who is connected with what. It doesn't matter whether it's investing, hiring, whatever it might be.
It's funny that even speaking about AI, and yet we're also talking about this super old school in real life thing called networking. Yep. And yet that still has not been replaced by technology, and probably never will be. But so I want to talk about briefly going back to WP Engine stuff, right?
Yes.
So I think a lot of founders, you get really, really, especially if your company's taking off in a rocket ship, I would imagine it's really difficult to walk away, right? If you're like, I'm in it, I'm in this position of power, things are going the way I want, this is what I started this for. How does someone have the kind of, I don't know, almost like guts or something to say, you know what, I'm going to walk away from, not walk away because you have equity in it, but walk away in a lot of ways.
No, well, I mean, my equity was, I've done my 4 years. I think for me, there's always, as you said, I've always not reinvented myself, but I've always had new projects, and I always knew there would be other things I would go on to. There was some murmurings around Uber and things that I might be able to do next anyway, and some other projects. So there was that. I think I also knew that I didn't want to move to Austin. As I said, very proud of Austin and WP Engine being there. I didn't want to move to Austin. Crystal was in art school at the time here in San Francisco, and her career would be based here, which it is. It wasn't right for us to move to Austin. I think as the company continued to grow, it's important to have, it's got a huge building now with lots of people in it in Austin. And yes, we have a world of remote work, but this was also a lot time before the pandemic. The reality is I needed to be in Austin. I didn't want to be in Austin. And I didn't quite have a role. I'm a generalist. I was really heading up marketing at WP Engine, but I have a software engineering and product management background. I was doing public policy work at Uber, which we'll talk about perhaps. I'm now a VC. I've got this kind of thing where I have a very sort of like very broad set of skills. Maybe that's why I'm a VC, and nothing specifically deep. And so I was, there's a humility to look at it and be like, I don't quite fit in here. And I'm okay with that. I genuinely am okay with that. And also the world is my oyster. This is not my only shot at things. We've got a great success here. This company will continue to be successful. Its growth and success since is not my responsibility, or I don't make any ownership of that other than to say that I helped build the foundation for it. But I've been able to go on and build other things and very proud of that. And I think the confidence of embracing the universe and knowing that the universe will provide something next for me. I've got to make those opportunities, but they're out there, and that there's an abundance of opportunity. And lo and behold, I find myself at Uber.
So, and I totally agree with the abundance of opportunity. I think in San Francisco and the people we interact with have that mindset a lot. I wonder if a lot of people in the world still have that mindset that there's always opportunity if you're willing to work hard and make it happen. But okay, so why Uber, right? World's your oyster. Yep. You can do anything you want. You're the successful founder. Why go to Uber?
I noodled on some startup ideas as well that I decided in the end not to do. I'd known Travis. I didn't know him super well, but I knew him for several years. He's an interesting guy. Saw him set up Uber. I was kind of involved in the web conference where some of the initial ideas came from, and I was actually a co-host of that for several years. So I knew him from various places. And then one day he approached me and was like, I want to build some product engineering to design around forwarding the public policy and legislative work that we're doing. We need to force multiply what we're doing. We're not going to do a lot of campaign donations. You've got a very interesting background. You've built stuff. I'm somewhat political. I have a hacker brain. And he was like, would you be, it's very hard to find somebody for this role, but if, and we need to set this up, this team doesn't exist. Would you be interested in coming in and chatting with us about it? So I chatted to him and Jeff Holden, the chief product officer at the time. And they were like, what would a plan look like? What would you do? What would you put together? And so I made a plan, and then they said to me, do you want to come in and do it? And I took a moment to think about it, because at that point, Uber, I think, was a $3 billion company, which means it was, I'm like, is this going to be a $10 billion company? Not I was necessarily thinking of the equity alone, but like, is this going to 3x? I mean, what's the deal here, right? Where's this really going? And the company had, I think, about 700 or 800 employees, but a lot of them were around the world opening up markets. I think in San Francisco there were 200 or 300 employees. So it still felt really small. I had a good connection, or would have a good connection, with Travis if I joined. And I thought about it, and I thought to myself, other than BBC, I've never done a Google, Facebook, Dropbox. I've never done one. I've never done one of the big companies, and maybe it would be interesting to do a turn also for the network. I kind of had thought about also trying to become a VC or getting into that. I was like, well, okay, the equity might be worth something here. So, and the public policy stuff fascinated me, and working already with some very interesting people at Uber who were already there, and some very interesting people that arrived shortly afterwards. And so I just looked at it and thought, yeah, it's that whole rocket ship thing again, where if somebody offers you a seat on a rocket ship, don't ask questions. And I was like, I don't know a whole lot about public policy, but I'm going to work with a bunch of people here that do. I'm going to learn a lot. Seems fun. Let's do it. See what happens.
And so it sounds like, one, going back to the point of networking, right? That job came solely because of networking, because you had known Travis through the networking you had done.
That's right.
You could vet him a little bit, and you get to come into a company that hopefully is a rocket ship. Yep. And at a senior position doing some cool stuff you hadn't done before. So it's a sort of learning journey for you as well. And was it everything you expected?
I will say I have never worked so hard. I would come home many evenings and fall asleep on the couch and have Crystal, my wife, make dinner. I did make dinner as well. Not sorry, it sounds like a sexist comment. Not making it. I would come home and she would make dinner because I was asleep. I would come home at like 7 o'clock. She would make dinner. I would sleep for a half hour and then I would wake up and then I'd probably eat and probably get on with some more work. I would come home absolutely exhausted. I was the pace at Uber was just an absolute onslaught because of the external, like it's a fight, right? We needed to make Uber legal in all of the states. You either do it or you don't. You can't do it on your own timeline. It's got to be done. There was a lot of work to be done. And I would just come home absolutely exhausted, but I was very fired up to do it and was happy to do it.
Speaking of that, I mean, this is actually a debate I have with my team a lot, which is what sort of culture should companies set, right? So a lot of the really successful companies, you hear stories that they have this incredibly fast-paced, sort of hardcore culture, right? Uber clearly had that, and you worked really hard, and it sounds like it was very fulfilling. Facebook certainly had that. A lot of people I know who were early at Facebook, you worked 7 days a week, and
Yep.
it was till 9 p.m., 10 p.m. at night every day, and there was no time for anything else. Obviously, Microsoft was famous for that. Amazon was famous for that. A lot of these, SpaceX certainly is, Tesla was, all these sorts of companies that were really successful. Is that a mindset that you think is probably not healthy long term, but is that one you even look for? Do you want founders who have this it is just going to be insane and that is just the way it is because we have to change the world and we have to do it now? Or is that unhealthy and the ones I mentioned are just the ones we all know of because they're famous for that culture and it's easy to write news articles about how insane they were?
Yeah, I mean, look, to have a very straightforward, unvarnished answer, like there is a real tension there because some of these cultures are unhealthy. And certainly there were aspects of Uber that were unhealthy. There's obviously a lot of publicity around things that happened at Uber, which I didn't see. I mean, in the environment that I was in, which was a limited one, I didn't see some of the bad behavior and things that was going on. There were a few things that I thought were not particularly great that were not, like show stoppers, but were things that I did pull up, particularly as I had, come from building and helping to build a company that I think to this day, WP Engine is known for having an amazing culture. Culture is very important, as I alluded to with the team, very pro-LGBTQ in a state that it typically isn't, very community-oriented in terms of open source community, in terms of the local communities that the WP Engine operates in, to go to this culture, which was very hardcore. I think the problem is that you have to weigh up, and certainly at the big companies, and then let's maybe quickly chat about small companies. The problem with big companies is when you've got a really huge mission, like ground transportation is a dirty business in terms of the fact that there is underhand stuff, there is corruption, there's all sorts of weird stuff going on, which if I ever write a book will be interesting. There's a lot of stuff going on there, and it's you're signing up for that by doing a business in that space. I think I have a family member who is at Apple, and I'm not saying they can't cut it. They've been there many years, but they find it very exhausting. And it's like Apple is trying to be the biggest, best company in the world, making the best products. And if you join Apple, even today, you know that you're signing up for that. And there are many people for whom in their life that it wouldn't be the right thing for them to do. They don't want to go and sit on the front line in a fight.
Although at the same time, Apple still seems like a little bit of a cushy-ish job because they're so big. They can't afford to push the boundaries and force their teams to work nonstop. Maybe the senior level does, but it seems like a cushier
From
place.
what I hear from a couple of people, there is a very high expectations internally of delivery.
But is that a good? I mean, that seems like a good thing in some ways that there is this high expectation. The best companies in the world have that high expectation.
Yeah, but it's not for everyone. And I think that people need to think about where they place themselves. Well, I'm not going to name names, but there are other big tech companies that I can think of where you can go and maybe make similar-ish kind of money and not have to do probably, you could do 75%. I think where it's interesting, where your question, I think, arced is early stage, because then as a founder, it's your responsibility. You set the decision. There were certainly, and again, I won't name them, but there were certainly some other ride-hailing apps that I think, and not Lyft, because Lyft is also successful, but some other ones that we don't even think about that were not as aggressive. And the reality is they died. That was the market. That was what do you Americans say? That was the game that was being played on the field or whatever, right? That's what it was, right? And so I think that as a founder, you have to think carefully about the culture that you want to create and also the market that you're going into and what it actually is going to allow you to compete and be successful. And there are definitely some areas of tech which are very cutthroat and punchy. And if you put a company there, you're going to have to work very hard. That doesn't mean you have a bad culture, but everybody then working needs to know that. I think there are other areas where, as a VC, I want everyone I invest in to be working hard, but I think you can have different types of cultures that are more nurturing of people for the long run. And I think you ultimately have to pick your battles and also think carefully. But I do think there are people that create awful cultures in companies unnecessarily, or have no awareness of the cultures that they're creating, or indeed have no awareness of the culture that they're not creating. And I try to flush that out. I try to avoid that. I try to not invest into people who I think are going to be tone deaf to culture, because as a CEO, that is also, I guess I said hiring, firing, setting a vision and raising money. I guess setting a vision includes the culture for the company that you want to build.
Yeah. And so I probably want to come back to culture if we have time, but I also want to get into that. So like thinking about that, right? So you're at Uber, you're doing this and you're working so hard, barely any time for anything, but also feeling very fulfilled. Mm-hmm. And yet you decide then to make this move and go into venture capital.
Yep.
What was the thinking behind that move? Like, why do that when you're clearly a builder?
Yeah, it's a good question. A couple of things. I think I left Uber when I was 37, 36. And I didn't go in as a senior. I came in, I went in as a senior product manager and ahead of my team. I could have probably gone in at a more senior level. I just didn't want to do that. I like building, as you said, and I was quite happy to do that. I think I looked around and realized from an ageism perspective that I was becoming I was an older man compared to many of the people. And that doesn't intimidate me, but it was, and I could have done a more senior role probably coming in from what I was doing at WP Engine, but I wouldn't have then done what I was working on, which interested me in public policy. My point was, I looked at it and thought, and don't forget, by the way, I've been doing this since 18, right? I've been doing this since I was 18 years old. And I'm like, I've been doing this long enough. And I'm starting to feel like I've learned a lot. I learned a lot at WP Engine. I learned a lot at Uber. I've learned a lot about a lot of different things: product management, marketing, public policy, the tech space, open source, and I could go on. And I just started looking at it and thought to myself, it's actually time for me to start leveraging up what's up here and not just the sweat. And don't get me wrong, being a VC is not an easy job. If you think being a VC is an easy job, I can tell you it is not, and I found that out. But I thought to myself, I could actually leverage that and genuinely, and this is why I like being a VC, pass on a lot of the guidance. If I can spend an hour with a founder and give them some perspective or help them ask questions to help them figure something out based on the experience that I have, and that unlocks something that completely changes their direction, that is so much more meaningful than me building another product for 6 months and shipping it.
So in a sense, you have the opportunity to impact a wider array of people because of that, because you're a VC.
Yeah, I think that being a VC enables me to leverage the stuff that I know, the network that I have, the ideas that I have. And I think having done this since I was 18, I was like, it's time to move to the dark side. Yep.
And I don't know, your camera sort of died here, but I know it keeps uploading, so maybe it's still working. I don't know what happened, but on my side, but all good. So on that note, right, a lot of people do think that being a VC is this sexy, easy thing to do, right? You have all these people who kind of suck up to you to some extent because they want something you have, which is money.
I don't know who these people are sucking up to me. I haven't seen them, but
but people see, like, if you're a founder and you meet a VC like who has their own fund, you're like, wow, this is like kind of a big deal. The VCs seem like the gatekeepers. Certainly when I was earlier in my career, I felt that way to some extent. They're like, these are the gatekeepers. These are people who decide whether they're going to anoint you as a company that can be successful or not. And what made you, so it's something why you decided to go make sense, but at the same time, what made you like take that path? In a sense, what I mean is like, okay, you go to a larger firm and then also start your own firm. What what is the advice that you would give to anybody who's in my position, right? It was sort of all the rage for the past few years and maybe that's changed a little bit now in 2023, but it's sort of the rage. Like I'm going to go start my own firm. I'm somebody who I worked at Google and therefore I'm qualified to, some big name thing and you have it on your resume. And now therefore I'm qualified to be a venture capitalist and raise, 10 to $50 million fund and dole it out to these companies who it was going to take 10 years for me to prove out if I'm actually successful and good at this job, but dole out that money. And it was sort of this sexy thing to do that a lot of people got into. What advice would you have to those folks? Since many of them, actually large majority, don't have anywhere close to the same success that you've had in your career, and yet they want to go do this. What advice do you give people like that?
Don't do it. No, that's
okay,
not
fine.
the way the layout there is. I think it's so. There's a couple of things to unpack. I think so. Somebody told me there are 3,000 venture capital investors. I don't know whether that's entirely true. Obviously, some people are VCs but don't have. There might be associates or principals, and not necessarily people that write checks.
And we're not talking about angels, right? That's not
just like professional investors, right? And so it's a pretty difficult job to get into, and it chews up and spits out a lot of people, and I'll find out whether I'm any good at this in 10 years time or 8 years time. My current fund is 2 years in. I think you really have to dig down deep, and in addition to like me saying, oh, I like helping founders, which I do, and I do see myself. I don't see myself as an anointer or a kingmaker. I genuinely see myself as a servant to founders. My job is to be advice and assistance in addition to the capital. But I think you really have to dig down deep and ask yourself the question that I often ask founders when I invest in them, which is, what's your unfair advantage? Why is it that you have something that nobody else has, and what is that allows you or will allow you to get access to great deals and also make the right decisions? Because at the end of the day, being a VC is an occupation of decision making. It's about making the right decisions. And
you also have to have the decisions presented to you, right? It's also going back to sort of the point which you didn't mean to have, which is it's about your connections and your network, because if you can't say yes or no to deals that you never see.
That's right. You have to have access, but you also and then have the decision making. It's both. That's right. But I think that you really have to ask yourself what gives you that unfair advantage. And I see many people who are either saying that they'd like to be a VC or trying to raise money, and they don't really have anything in hand. There's nothing differentiated, and there is nothing that particularly gives them the ability to have that unfair advantage. And I say that not as a smarmy, therefore you should do it. It's more like you need to go back and actually solve that, right? If being a VC is what you really want to do, go for it. But be very clear with whether it's an unfair advantage from a network that you have, or a particular understanding about a particular market. Like if you worked at Uber and you understand all sorts of efficiencies and dynamics of two-sided or three-sided marketplaces, then that sounds great. If that continues to be a great way, area to build startups in, because you're going to have an amazing way of picking startups and helping founders with marketplace ideas. But if you've never done that, then it's like me saying I'm suddenly going to invest in life science and healthcare. Like I actually do have an interest in biology. It would have been what I would have studied at university, arguably, rather than computer science. But it would be silly for me to start investing in wet labs and research what on earth do I know about any of that? And I see sometimes people with the same way into software, and I'm like, you have no business investing in software. And the market will tell you, because you'll raise money from LPs, which is really tough. Raising money as a founder is tough. Raising money for a fund is really, really tough. And if you've got really good connections to LPs, then maybe you can get away with it if you don't have the credibility. But to properly raise a fund, you need to not only demonstrate your abilities and your knowledge and your network, but you also need to have that network of LPs who trust you and have faith in you to actually return, a sizable, healthy return on their investment, and particularly in this era when there are many other options now than there were maybe 2 or 3 years ago to put your money. Because at the end of the day, anybody that says, oh, we invest because we want to enable the next generation of AI, or we want to, people are putting money in because they want to see money come back out. That is the reality. My job is actually is to be a money manager, and it always makes me weird when I'm buying like car insurance and it says what industry do you work in, and I go tech. No, actually, I'm in finance. That's actually the industry that I'm in now.
It's a great way of putting it, and it is, and it's in a really different mindset in some ways. Like you are in finance, and that's what you do, is getting a return. And your LPs are expecting that you should beat after fees at minimum, beat the S&P 500, and hopefully by a significant margin, which the last time I looked at the stats, I think is actually pretty rare for VCs to end up doing. So on that note, I mean, like, why? So for Monochrome Capital, right, your firm, what is that differentiation? Like, why should a founder ever want to have a chat with Ben beyond he's just a great guy, chat with you and take money from you if there's a mutual interest there?
Well, many founders probably shouldn't. I have a very specific focus and thesis, and so if it's outside of thesis, I can't help you anyway. The thesis of Monochrome Capital is to invest in very technical B2B startups, ones like cloud infrastructure, horizontal and vertical AI and machine learning, API-driven businesses, cybersecurity, data processing, developer productivity. So really, if somebody has a strong technical founder, if they're building something with a very interesting technical moat and they're going to sell it into enterprise, which is a whole art in itself, and hopefully if I've done anything at WP Engine, it was learning how to sell and market and go to market a reasonably technical B2B product into enterprises all the way down to small, medium enterprises as well, and self-service. If that looks like the type of company that you're building, then I love talking about that. Hopefully I've demonstrated some experience and ability, and I love to work with founders, also ones that are not in the portfolio. I spend time with founders who are not part of the portfolio. But in addition to putting in the capital, Monochrome Capital likes to support founders in terms of building out go-to-market, general startup advice, just being there in terms of like what it's like to go through a hyperscale growing startup, which very, very fortunately I've witnessed and been part of, which actually many VCs haven't. So yeah.
So true. And then speaking of in the next few minutes, like there are two markets that I think you do know a lot about that are certainly kind of hypey to some extent, right? You've watched Web3 kind of go from massive hype down really quickly, and AI suddenly take off. What are your thoughts on kind of both of those industries from just an investment, interest, excitement? How does one invest? I mean, AI, everybody's an AI company now, and probably most venture capitalists are going to lose their money on most of these companies because you're essentially funneling them money so they can give it to NVIDIA or give it to AWS for servers. Yep. And that's not a real business. That's not a long-term viable.
Yep. I'll be really quick because I know we're going up to time. So I do invest in Web3. I'm frankly not investing right now because we've made a bunch of investments. I still remain very excited and bullish. I think Web3 for me is the ownership economy. It's the tokenization of ownership of things. I'm not as interested in the financial fuckery of putting around tokens and staking and creating financial instruments for mucking around. Maybe you can make a lot of money doing that. It's not an area that I'm interested in building. I do think that there are some very interesting use cases around an open protocol for tokenizing ownership of digital and physical goods. I maintain that interest. We need to wait for the market to come back. It'll take a few years. There's no point investing in anything else right now, for me at least. But I think that it's still going to be very interesting. We just need to wait, like many of these hype cycles. With AI, so you said every company is an AI company. It probably claims to be. I think very few companies are truly AI companies. At the end of the day, to really truly build something with AI, you really need to have a degree of technical understanding, whether you're building the fundamental models or even if you're building on top of somebody else's API. I think what's really important is that to what I just said, there is a bifurcation of two different things. Owning a model, if you invent a self-driving car model that can drive a car around a city, you essentially own the equivalent of huge amounts of labor, right, of people driving cars. And there is a huge economic enterprise value to that. That one's done, Waymo, Cruise, or whatever. But think about all of the other. That's just a very visceral example. But think about the models that you could own and have huge enterprise value. That's very interesting from a investment perspective. And then the other one is being able to take an API or take another model and build something with a great vertical value. That's interesting. You just have to be really clear on how you don't get screwed if the terms of that access to that model change. Suddenly it 10x is in price, or the quality isn't maintained or whatever, because you're not, you're building on somebody else's toll road, right? You're not in complete control. So there's a lot of interesting intricacies and things there around managing risk and thinking about the types of companies that will be successful. But I'm very excited to invest in either of those two spaces.
And how do you find these companies? Are they coming to you? Are they getting introduced by friends? You do like to tweet, and by the way, everyone should follow you on Twitter.
Tweet about a lot of stuff, but yes, including some AI.
You do, and I want to make sure we have time. The last minute of this, I want to ask you for your favorite pun, because I know you have some good puns out there.
Don't ask me about puns, particularly as I've already sworn here, and they probably won't be appropriate. All of the above. There are 30 events a week in San Francisco. I go to a lot of events. I'm very well networked, and very luckily people send me introductions to great founders. The tip that I'm not loath to share, I will share, is for me, I spend a lot of time looking for talent, because particularly for AI, if you haven't got talent in your team, you aren't going to be able to build something, even if you're spot on with some market opportunity. And even if you can half build it, you're not going to be successful. And so to really identify talent that's already at Google and Facebook that's waiting to leave, spend a lot of time with people who are needing the comfort to leave. Maybe they'll get a payout, maybe they'll just leave on their own. People around, and a lot of people with PhDs and in this space, and who else do they know that's what. So really going where the talent is and exploring the talent is my secret sauce at the moment for finding a lot of these deals.
And that's it. Credit to you in a lot of ways for that, because it's one of those things where it just takes the legwork kind of to do that, right? It's in some ways it's not that secret, right? The way you build great companies, we talked about this whole time, is you find great talent and you help them hire other great talent. They bring their friends in, everything else. But to do all that takes a lot of time. And frankly, most people are a little bit lazy, including lots of VCs, right? They would rather sit behind their computer screens, pull in data from a million different data sources and say, oh, these people seem interesting. But it's actually the legwork getting to know these people and building those relationships, which again, go back to connections that get you to where you are.
It takes years and years to be an overnight success.
Yep, and it seems that way to a lot of people, that you are an overnight success, and that it is yours. So, given we are right at time, do you have a pun? Give me one good pun, something good.
No, I don't have any puns. All of my dad jokes. People my wife keeps saying that I have lots of dad jokes, but they're X-rated inappropriate dad jokes that I'm certainly not going to quote here, unfortunately.
Well, our loss completely. Ben, thank you so much. This was a ton of fun. Truly, I learned a lot more about you that I didn't even know, and even more respect as always. So thank you. Thank you so much.